It's roughly 1909 BC. We're standing on a jagged limestone ravine beside the Jabbok River, just east of the Jordan. If you look at the map today, that is the Zarqa River in modern-day Jordan. It's a place of steep cliffs and rushing water. And on this specific night, it's the site of the weirdest fight in human history. An old man named Jacob, 97 years old, wealthy but absolutely terrified, is alone in the dark. Suddenly, he's tackled. For the next 6 hours, he's going to wrestle a mysterious man who turns out to be God in human form. By sunrise, Jacob will have a permanent limp, a brand new name, and a legacy that'll spark the nation of Israel. But how did we get here? To understand the man, we have to trace the map. We'll trace his journey from the desert wells of the Negev to the trade hubs of Haran and the royal courts of Egypt to better understand this entire 147-year journey of Jacob. Our story begins here at the southernmost edge of the promised land known as Beersheba. This is the place where Isaac, son of Abraham, begged the Lord for his barren wife Rebekah. The Lord granted his prayer, yet the blessing brought immediate confusion. As the scriptures record in Genesis 25:22, the children struggled together within her. The conflict was so violent that Rebekah asked God why this was happening to her. God answered her with a prophecy for centuries to come. He said, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other. The older shall serve the younger." When the day of the twins' birth finally arrived, the first son came out red and covered in hair like a garment. Because of his first appearance, they named him Esau, which means hairy in Hebrew. Immediately following him was his brother, whose hand was strongly holding Esau's heel. They named him Jacob, as he is the one who follows at the heel. This moment shows how from Jacob's very first breath, he was already defined by a desire to pull down what was ahead of him. When the twins grew up, they felt distant from each other. They both knew that having a twin brother means one thing: an automatic competition for their parents' inheritance. The divide between them grew even wider when Esau became a skillful hunter and got recognized in Beersheba as a man of the field, who lived for the thrill of the chase. This made him the pride of his father, as Isaac loves the venison he takes home. Jacob, however, was described as a quiet man dwelling in tents in Genesis 25:27. Every time Esau roamed the wilderness, he just stayed watchful within the camp to observe the dynamics of his family. Still, Rebekah favored Jacob because of the prophecy, "The older shall serve the younger," which she received during her pregnancy. Together, they were both just waiting for the opportunity where Esau would finally submit to Jacob. That opportunity arrived on a day when Esau returned from the field, exhausted and starving. When he found Jacob boiling a stew of red lentils, Esau demanded to be fed and claimed that he was at the point of death. Grabbing the long-awaited opportunity in front of him, Jacob proposed a transaction to Esau that would shatter their family dynamics. "Sell me your birthright now," he said. That birthright was the spiritual leadership of the clan, which would grant the holder the authority over his family and a double portion of the inheritance. Yet, because Esau was driven by his physical need, he despised the birthright. He swore a solemn oath to Jacob, ate the lentil soup, and went his way. In that quiet transaction, the entire fortune of Esau was exchanged for just a bowl of soup. However, the birthright was only a legal claim and did not come with the actual power he wanted. Jacob still needs to receive his father's blessing. Fast forward years later, Isaac's now old and having a hard time seeing. He started to feel like his clock's ticking, so he calls Esau in for the final ceremony by saying, "Go hunt some deer, cook it the way I like, and I'll give you my blessing before I die." This final soul blessing was irrevocable. It is a divine prophecy spoken over the heir that acted as a transfer of the Abrahamic covenant. So when Rebekah heard Isaac's plan to bless Esau, she started to feel uneasy, because the prophecy said that the older would serve the younger. But his older son was about to receive the blessing. At that exact moment, she felt the need to intervene. She instructed Jacob to bring her 2 young goats, which she prepared into a savory dish. To successfully deceive his blind father, she dressed Jacob in Esau's finest garments that carried the scent of the field. She also covered Jacob's smooth hands and neck with the skins of goats to totally mask his true identity. With the complete disguise, Jacob entered his father's tent carrying the food. His heart was trembling under the weight of his deception. When Isaac questioned how the hunt had been completed so quickly, Jacob invoked the name of the Lord and replied, "Because the Lord your God granted me success." Although Isaac recognized that the voice sounded like Jacob's, the hairy hands and smell of the open field were able to convince him. Reassured that it was Esau, he ate the meal and embraced the son before him. As he believed he was blessing the right son, he pronounced the covenantal blessing of Abraham upon Jacob, declaring, "Let people serve you, and nations bow down to you. Be lord over your brothers." As soon as Jacob left, Esau returned from the hunt. Esau immediately found the truth and was trembling in anger. he realized that he had lost for the second time. First his birthright, and now his blessing. Because of deep distress, he cried out in front of Isaac, saying, "Bless me, even me also, O my father." But it was too late, because the blessing had already been given and could not be taken back. His grief then quickly turned to anger, and he decided in his heart that once his father had passed, he would kill his brother Jacob. Rebekah realizes she saved Jacob's future, but put a target on his head. She tells Jacob, "You need to get out of here. Run to my brother Laban in Haran. Stay for a few weeks until your brother cools down." Jacob followed his mother's advice and started a 450-mile solo trek into the wilderness. He left the security of his father's camp and began a lonely journey toward Haran, the land of his mother's kin. At this moment, he was no longer an heir waiting for his inheritance anymore. He was now a runaway wandering into the unknown. As the sun sank behind the rocky hills of Luz, Jacob realized he was not going to make it to the city that day, so he laid down for the night while resting his head on a stone. There, in the stillness of the wilderness, he dreamed of a map between heaven and earth that was opening up. He sees what the Bible calls a sulam, which is a ladder that resembles the massive tiered staircases of Mesopotamian ziggurats. It serves as a ceremonial pathway between heaven and earth, where angels move up and down upon. Above it stood the Lord, confirming that the blessing Jacob had taken was truly established by God. "Behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go." Jacob wakes up in a cold sweat and great awe. He says, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it." He then poured oil on the stone, set it apart, and named the place Bethel, or the house of God. Following that, because of his desperation to survive his long journey to Haran, he made a vow and declared that, "If God will be with me, and if he gives me the bread to eat and clothes to wear, then he shall be my God." However, this moment of reassurance and spiritual encounter did not mean that the road ahead of him would be easy. Jacob continued walking north, crossed the Jordan River, and moved through the Syrian desert until he finally reached Haran. He stopped at a nearby well when he saw a beautiful woman named Rachel bringing her father's sheep. Jacob, so overwhelmed with relief and attraction that he stepped forward and rolled the heavy stone away from the mouth of the well to water her flock, a task that normally required several men. When Laban heard that his nephew had arrived, he ran to greet him and embraced him warmly, calling him his own flesh and blood. At this point, the kindness of people made Jacob feel like he finally found a new home. Yet he did not know that he was just about to discover that Laban was a master of deception, even more cunning than Jacob himself. Jacob falls in love with Rachel. It turns out to be Laban's daughter, but he has no money for a bride price, so he can only propose a deal to Laban. "I'll work for you for 7 years for Rachel," Jacob suggested. Laban accepted the offer of free labor, and the next 7 years of Jacob in Haran seemed to him but a few days because of the love he had for her, as mentioned in Genesis 29:20. When the 7 years were finally completed, Laban prepared a massive wedding feast, but under the cover of darkness, and likely the heavy veiling of the bride, Laban brought his older daughter, Leah, to Jacob instead of Rachel. When the morning light came, Jacob looked at the woman beside him and realized that he had been betrayed. He went straight to Laban, asking, "What is this that you've done to me? Did I not serve with you for Rachel?" Laban's response was ice cold. "It is not so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn." That moment was full irony, as Jacob, the deceiver who tricked his father by pretending to be the firstborn, had been deceived by his father-in-law into marrying his firstborn. But that's not all. Knowing Jacob's desperation, Laban offered him a new deal. "Finish Leah's wedding week, and I'll give you Rachel too. But you have to work another 7 years." Trapped by custom and his love for Rachel, Jacob immediately agreed to work another 7 years. He did eventually receive Rachel, but the true cost was 14 years of free labor. In this complicated household, the beginnings of a nation slowly took shape. Though Leah was unloved, she was able to bear children for Jacob. Rachel, on the other hand, who receives all the love, was not able to conceive. Instead of peace, there was rivalry and competition inside the house. There's a deep struggle for Jacob's affection that even involved the maidservants, Bilhah and Zilpah. Eventually, this divided family had a total of 12 sons and a daughter: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, Benjamin, and Dinah. The sons would later become the fathers of the 12 tribes of Israel. Continuing the story, Laban saw that Jacob's flocks were increasing and kept changing his wages, hoping to reduce his profit. But his every plan failed because Jacob found a unique technique to produce the offspring needed. He takes peeled branches of poplar and almond and places them in the watering troughs, so that when strong animals mate in front of these visual patterns, they would produce speckled offspring. That is why when Laban set speckled animals as wages, speckled animals were born. When striped animals were chosen, striped animals appeared. In the end, what was meant to limit Jacob only made him prosper more. He started owning large flocks, servants, camels, and donkeys. But this wealth came with an increasing tension in Haran. As Laban's wealth starts to dry up, his sons become jealous of Jacob's achievement. After some time, Jacob felt the change in the atmosphere in Haran and started to feel unsafe. So the Lord once spoke to him again, saying, "Return to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you." When Jacob received the message, he knew this decision would not be easy, because leaving Haran meant facing his past that he had been running from, including the brother he had deceived years earlier. Still, Jacob trusted the direction the Lord had given to him. He shared his plan to escape Haran with Rachel and Leah, and they both agreed. They reminded him that their father had taken advantage of him for years, so there was no reason to remain loyal to Haran. With that, Jacob gathered his wives and children and fled in secret when Laban was 3 days away from shearing sheep. They crossed the Euphrates and headed toward the hill country of Gilead, a region that is under Laban. Jacob knew the risk of entering this place but continued because he thought Laban had no big reasons to have them pursued by his authorities, but he didn't know that a huge problem had been following them since they left Haran. Before leaving Haran, Rachel had stolen Laban's teraphim, or the household idols, without telling Jacob. An ancient Hurrian law found in the Nuzi tablets, possessing these idols gives a person the legal right to the father's estate. 3 days after the escape of Jacob's group, Laban discovered both the idols and Jacob's absence. Laban was so furious about the betrayal that he set out on a pursuit. After several days, he caught up with Jacob near the mountains of Gilead. Both groups were tense and prepared for conflict, but instead of a violent confrontation, the two fought with heavy accusations. Laban shouted, "Why did you run like a thief? And why did you steal my gods?" Jacob, defensive and unaware, answered, "Search everything. If you find your gods with anyone, let them die." Laban goes from tent to tent to search for the idols, not knowing that when Rachel saw him, she immediately hid the idols in a camel saddlebag and sat on them. And when Laban enters her tent, she made a smart excuse. "Don't be mad. I can't stand up because of the matter of women is upon me." When Laban found nothing in the camp, Jacob finally released 20 years of pent-up frustration. He listed every time Laban changed his wages, every animal that died on his watch, and the unfair treatment he had experienced under Laban. This moment made them both realize that they cannot live together anymore. In the end, they made a covenant of peace. They gathered stones into a heap and called it Mizpah. It stood as a boundary and a promise that neither would cross it to harm the other. After that agreement, Laban went back home, and Jacob continued his journey, carrying mixed emotions. He felt relief at being finally free from Laban, yet at the same time, he was walking straight towards the brother he had betrayed 20 years earlier, Esau. As they drew closer to their destination, Jacob's fear began to rise again. Hoping to soften the encounter before it happened, he sent messengers ahead to Esau to prepare the way and ease the tension between them. But the messengers returned to Jacob with chilling news. Esau was on his way to meet him, and he was bringing 400 men. Unsure of his brother's intentions, he divided his people into 2 camps, thinking that if Esau attacked one group, the other might escape. Then he turned to prayer. "I'm not worthy of the least of all the steadfast love and faithfulness you've shown your servant," he confessed. After that, he sends massive waves of bribes, like livestock, maids, and supplies, ahead of him. He's trying to buy his way out of his past. And this brings us back to the Yabok. After helping his family cross the stream, Jacob remained alone in the darkness. A mysterious man appeared and grabbed him. That man turned out to be God. After he had struggled with his brother in the womb, with his father over the blessing, and with Laban over wages, he's now wrestling with God himself for the whole night. As dawn approached, the man touched Jacob's hip and instantly pulled it out of its place. Yet even in pain, Jacob refused to let go. "I'll not let you go unless you bless me," he cried. The man asked, "What's your name?" And for the first time, Jacob answered honestly, "Jacob." Then came the turning point. As mentioned in Genesis 32:28, the man told him, "Your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men, and have prevailed." When the sun rose over Peniel, Jacob walked away limping and physically wounded, yet changed within, and when he finally saw Esau, he bowed to the ground 7 times to show respect and fear. But instead of violence, the meeting unfolded peacefully. Esau ran to meet him, embraced him, and cried. The fear Jacob had been carrying for years dissolved in a single moment. He also cried after knowing the brother he expected to fight chose reconciliation. Jacob offered gifts, yet Esau refused by saying he already had enough. This exchange showed how much had changed since their last meeting, how Jacob, who was once the taker, now insists on giving. But peace did not last. Jacob settles near the city of Shechem. He bought land as he thinks his adventure is officially over. However, his daughter Dinah was impured and abducted by the prince of the city. When Jacob's sons Simon and Levi found out about it, they planned a brutal act of revenge. When Shechem and his father Hamor proposed marriage between Shechem and Dinah and intermarriage with their people, Simeon and Levi acted deceitfully. They told the Shechemites that it was a disgrace for their sister to marry an uncircumcised man, and promised that if every male in the city was circumcised, they would allow the marriage, intermarry, and become one people. Because Shechem loved Dinah so much, he and his father convinced all of the men of the city to comply, and every male was circumcised. Yet on the third day, when the men were in the most pain and disabled, Simeon and Levi took their swords and took the lives of every male, including Hamor and Shechem. When Jacob learned about what his two sons did, he feared that the Canaanites would get back to his family. So they were forced to move again. They all went toward Bethel, the place where God had first appeared to Jacob years earlier. But tragedy seems to be following them, as along their journey, Rachel passed away after giving birth to Benjamin. While still grieving his loss, he brought his family to Hebron, hoping to reunite with his father Isaac. Yet just a few years after Rachel, Isaac also passed away. These losses made Jacob realize how life had not become easier after his reunion with Esau, and how fragile peace could be. But still, he continued forward. Jacob remained in Hebron for the following years, but the story now turned to his sons. He loved Joseph, Rachel's firstborn, more than the others. He gives him the Ketanet Pasim, a royal long-sleeve robe of many colors. Jealousy consumed the 10 older brothers, and attention grew quietly until it reached a breaking point. While tending sheep far from home, they seized the opportunity to sell Joseph into Egyptian slavery. They then brought Joseph's symbolic coat, stained it with blood, and claimed he had been killed by an animal to hide the truth from their father. For 22 years, Jacob grieved the loss, believing Joseph was gone. Yet God was weaving a larger plan. A famine struck the land, and the food became scarce. Jacob was forced to send his sons to Egypt to buy grain for their family. In Egypt, Joseph had risen from slavery to authority. Through hardship and patience, he was able to gain influence and responsibility. When his brothers arrived seeking food, Joseph recognized them. After a series of tests, Joseph revealed his identity. The brothers were reunited, and the wounds of the past were closed. Word reached Jacob that Joseph is alive and is now prime minister of Egypt. Overwhelmed and hardly able to believe it, he gathered his 70 descendants and set out for Egypt at the age of 130 years old. It was a long journey, but God spoke to him in visions at night, telling him, "Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will make you into a great nation." And there, after 22 long years of grief and separation, Jacob was reunited with Joseph in a tearful embrace, and settled his family in the land of Goshen. 17 years after the reunion, Jacob's life neared its end. He gathered his 12 sons around him, and prophesied the future of the tribes. In a final act that subverted tradition, Joseph brought his sons to be blessed. He placed the firstborn, Manasseh, at Jacob's right hand. But Jacob, blind with age, intentionally crossed his arms and laid his right hand on the younger, Ephraim. When Joseph objected, saying, "Not so, my father, for this one is the firstborn," Jacob replied, "I know, my son, I know." God's choice, he understood, depends not on birth order, but on grace. Jacob passed away at the age of 147. He instructed that he be buried in the cave of Machpelah in Canaan, with Abraham and Isaac. His body was escorted by a great company of chariots and horsemen, a final testament to his faith in God's promise. From Beersheba to Haran, from Haran back to Canaan, and from Canaan to Egypt. Jacob's 147-year-long journey was full of wrestling matches with his family, his father-in-law, his wives, himself, and God. He started as Jacob, the man who grabs what he wants, and ended as Israel, the man who receives what God gives. This long journey of his proves that God doesn't use people with perfect faith. He uses people who he knows would not let go of him, and through the wrestling, the trials, the grief, and the reconciliation, he shapes them into his own. Even today, the name Israel stands as a monument to the man who limped his way into history.